At the dog park, Samson was almost always sitting by himself. While the other dogs raced across the grass, wrestled with each other, or ran up to greet every new face, Samson usually found a quiet corner where he could simply watch. He wasn't nervous around other dogs, and he wasn't shy with people either. He just never seemed to know how to join in. Sometimes it felt like he wanted to, but he didn't quite know where he fit. When Samson became part of our family, he was training to be a medical response service dog. He took that job incredibly seriously. In fact, there were times when it felt like he took it a little too seriously. Even when he was supposed to be off duty, he had trouble relaxing. Instead of running around or playing like most dogs, he'd stay focused, almost as if he was still waiting for his next job. Then, one day, while we were traveling, Samson suddenly stopped in front of a window. Inside sat a tiny kitten. The change in him was immediate. His ears perked up, his tail started wagging, and he leaned a little closer, completely focused on the tiny cat inside. More than anything, he looked like he wanted to play. Watching him that day felt like seeing a completely different side of Samson. That's when it finally clicked for us. Samson was perfectly capable of forming deep social connections. He simply hadn't met the right companion yet. That moment stayed with us. By the time we returned home, we'd already decided that we wanted to adopt a kitten. A couple of months later, Cleo arrived. We placed her backpack in the middle of the living room before opening it. Samson walked over right away, carefully sniffing around the bag while we unzipped it. The second we lifted Cleo out, he became more excited than we'd ever seen him before. He could barely contain himself. Honestly, we expected him to be curious. We never imagined he'd react with that much joy. It was heartwarming to watch him come out of his shell almost instantly. From that very first day, Samson treated Cleo differently than any other animal he'd ever known. He always wanted to be wherever she was. If she wandered into another room, he'd quietly follow. If she settled down somewhere for a nap, he'd lie nearby. It didn't take long before they were spending nearly all of their time together. As Cleo grew, she started joining us on all of our outdoor adventures. She turned out to be an amazing little hiking partner. Then one day, during a hike, her tiny legs had simply had enough. She slowed down, started dragging her feet, and finally stopped altogether. Then came the little meows that told us she wasn't interested in walking another step. At first, we figured one of us would carry her. Then we looked at Samson. Almost as a joke, we wondered if Cleo would sit on his back. We gently lifted her up and placed her there. She held onto his fur with her tiny claws, and Samson stood perfectly still until she found her balance. Once she was comfortable, we started walking again. To our surprise, Cleo seemed to love it. From that day on, whenever she gets tired on a hike, she rides on Samson's back and enjoys the view while he carries her along the trail. And somehow, Samson always looks proud to be helping his little sister. When I watch the two of them together now, I don't just see a giant dog and a tiny kitten. I see two friends who trust each other completely. The biggest surprise wasn't simply that Samson found someone to play with. It was seeing how much that friendship changed him. Cleo helped him step outside the quiet little world he'd been living in and become more open to everything around him. We never imagined that one tiny kitten would have such a lasting impact on Samson. Looking back now, it's hard to picture one without the other.